This podcast is part of the Pull Up a Chair podcast network. Let's build community through connection, conversation, and collaboration. This podcast is sponsored by Lever Consulting, editing with a purpose. Check them out at leverconsulting.com for a free consultation.
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty. Man, we just putting on a show.
Welcome to How's That Working For You Season 2. It's your girls Kat and V, but this time we're taking deeper dives into mental health and breaking stigmas. So get ready because things are about to get real and personal. How's That Working For You is a passion project created with the intention of creating space and awareness around mental health topics that are often hard to talk about. We are not professionals in the field of mental health, but we speak from our own personal experience and thoroughly conduct our own research to help educate others on why it's important to join this conversation. Hey V, what's up?
Hey Kat, I thought it's finally time that I addressed the episode that I said I was going to do forever ago, talking about invisible disabilities.
Yes, just bestow your knowledge upon us about invisible disabilities, please.
Well, the first thing I will bestow is stats, because somehow that's turned into a tradition on our show.
I hate that. I hate stats. I'm like, oh, thanks for the PTSD. Like,
well, it things in perspective. Okay. So 30% of the United States workforce fits the federal definition of having a disability. With that being said, 96% of individuals with disabilities have what are referred to as invisible disabilities. An invisible disability is a disability that isn't 100% transparent as soon as you look at a person.
wow, that's a lot of people. So it's like, of that 30%, 96% of those people have invisible disabilities.
Yeah,
wow.
most disabilities are invisible.
Right.
And I mean, that makes sense, because not all disabilities are like, you're missing an arm, you're missing a leg, you have no nose.
That sounds like oh my god, please don't come for me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean, but like not having a nose seems like quite a disability.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. Some common examples of invisible disabilities include cancer,
Oh no.
Crohn's disease, microphalgia, irritable bowel syndrome,
Oh god.
a large variety of mental health conditions. And there is a general argument over should mental health issues, conditions count as a disability, or should there be a different category separating physical and mental disabilities, which is, a huge can of worms with a lot of nuance and a lot of complications, which we can talk about in a future episode if anybody's interested in hearing a debate. Either way, if somebody has a disability that makes them struggle in their daily life or their work life, they are disabled.
Mm-hmm.
And there shouldn't be shame or stigma around that, but there is, which is why we're talking about it. And then, we've talked about my disability quite a bit at this point. I have cerebral palsy. Now, my case is mild enough that I count as a person with an invisible disability because I seemingly function just fine. I walk a little funny, but I look, for all intents and purposes, like a normal person. But if I were to get, a disabled sticker placard or the card and then park in the wheelchair parking spots, you better bet somebody's going to say some shit to me.
Right.
Because there's not always an understanding with disabilities, especially those that are invisible. Like if you see a person in a wheelchair, you're not going to ask them, hey, why do you need that parking spot? Or, hey, why do you need the specialized carts at the grocery store? Nobody's going to do that because very few people want to be that kind of asshole. There are those Karens out there who don't mind being that kind of asshole. But by and large, if somebody sees that there's something physically wrong with you, they're not going to say something.
I don't know. Even a Karen has their standards. Like,
not according to Reddit. I've seen some horror stories.
You seriously have to have like a serious how rude do you have to be to insult an actual person in a wheelchair? Like, that's just like, that's next level. Yeah, that's a very low bar. I'm sorry. I don't know. If you weren't already going to hell, you're going there for sure.
For sure. But that's not the case for disabilities that aren't super apparent. You see this coming up a lot with cancer patients who haven't yet lost their hair. Because everybody has an image in their head of what a disabled person looks like. And not every disabled person looks that way. Not even every disabled person acts and needs the same things. I need very different things to help me with my dyslexia versus things to help me with my cerebral palsy. Like, those are very, very two realms of my world, but they're both, disable me quite a bit in my daily life.
Yeah.
And this brings me to, like, my own biggest struggle with my disability, and it's not necessarily walking, because yes, that is a problem. That is a struggle. That is something I deal with. But I have for years been embarrassed to tell people, hey, I am disabled. And apparently I am not alone. Because out of those 30% of people in the American workforce who have a disability, which is an invisible disability more specifically, 20% of those individuals hide the fact that they are disabled from their employer. And, sometimes that might not affect their work, but sometimes it might. And then they look like a shitty employee.
I think that's like really apparent in especially mental disabilities, mental disorders specifically. Like, I feel like that's like a huge issue, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because like for me, I don't know. That's why. I mean, my dad specifically, he's like, why are you so open about your disability or like what your mental? Well, I mean, I guess there's a stigma for bipolar people that they're crazy and that they like, they're problematic people. And yes, some of us are, like, especially the ones that don't get help and are, that suffer from the stigma that people place on them. Yeah, those, Yeah,
like, it can be scary.
I can see that. I can definitely see why people would hide that. It's embarrassing, like, even for me for a while, but I think that's why we have to talk about it, and which is why I will let you continue.
That's exactly why we have to talk about it. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was enacted, basically saying, no, you can't fire an employee because they're a double amputee. No, you can't do all these things. There's like a long list of...
What year was that?
1990. Yeah,
that's shocking. That is shocking to me. What? Like, what?
Yeah.
Only 30 years ago? Like, wow, that's... Wow.
And prior to that, there was, like, laws, not, like, laws protecting, but, like, it was commonplace for you to employ somebody who was disabled and then pay them below the minimum wage, because you could always make the argument that they weren't doing as much work as their able-bodied employees. And there's many jobs that you can do as a disabled person that your disability won't affect at all.
Yeah.
Like, I shouldn't try to get a job where I have to do a bunch of manual labor unless I want to, ruin my body forever. And I also shouldn't do a job where I'm doing a bunch of data entry, because I'll probably bankrupt the company. But there's a lot of other jobs that I'm great at. Designing websites, fairly decent. Working with kids, great.
Yeah,
awesome.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and there's a lot of struggles that come along with being a disabled person to begin with. And so to also deal with stigmas attached to it, and then have people misunderstand you. Because there's quite often the argument of, if I don't see your disability, it probably doesn't exist. And the assumption that a lot of people who have invisible disabilities are making it up. Now, I kind of get where that mindset coming from, like the worry of you being taken advantage of. But it's so rare for a person to come out with their, like, disability on full display that it isn't really so much a problem of people like gaming the system, as there is this widely held belief that people game the system. Those who do game it are so rare.
Use the system, or like abuse the system, right?
Yeah, abuse the system. It's a rare thing. It does happen, but it's very rare. And because people are so worried about that, there still is this heavy bias against people who have invisible disabilities. There's always the question of, okay, well, where's your doctor's note? Okay, well, why aren't you looking like this? Okay, well, why aren't you behaving this way? And this especially comes in for people who have learning and mental disabilities, people who are on the autism spectrum. Yeah, and there's like this assumption that people on the autism spectrum can't be trusted with anything because they do have their mental struggles. But everybody's disability is on the spectrum. Yeah. That's the thing with a lot of physical and mental handicaps. It's not like you have blank, therefore you can only physically or mentally do blank.
I even think that people on the autism spectrum, people question whether they're on the autism spectrum if they don't behave a certain way.
Yeah, that comes up a lot.
People still have like this like bias like for what people with autism look like and behave like the trope is like they're either like really, really smart and have no social skills, or like or they're like, you know, complete, like they're just not good at things, or just like they're dumb or something like that, you know? But like that's not true. Yeah. The autism spectrum is like massive. It's like you just don't know.
No, it's absolutely huge, and it's awful that people have the expectation that just because you're not as capable as an able-bodied person means that you're less worthy for love, less worthy for a job, for any amount of a normal life. And a lot of people who have disabilities, it impacts them, of course, but it doesn't mean that their whole life is consumed by their disability. And you see this a lot in people who have visible disabilities. That's why there are...
there was this, I think it was, I don't know if it was Brazil. It was somewhere. I think it was either a Middle Eastern country or a South American country. But like there's the not paraplegic, but it was like the disabled Olympics, like mentally disabled Olympics.
The Special Olympics. Yeah,
yeah, the Special Olympics. Okay. So like this country decided that they wanted to make like 90% of their team normal, like just
able-bodied.
typical able-thinking, able-bodied people, because they wanted to win so that they could have more like funding for their like disabled, which is like sad. I mean, it's
oh man,
you know, it's kind of like, well, they were trying to do a good thing for themselves, but it's also really, really fucked up, you know, like
that's a sticky situation right there.
Sorry, I was just like, I thought about that because I was just like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's also an issue.
That is a huge issue.
Yeah, that's an example of people taking advantage of the system.
You know, it's a special case. It's not like they found one country doing it out of all of the countries.
Yeah,
okay.
That's so messed up. I'll have to send you the article or like the video because I know you'll love watching it. But anyway, keep going.
And so one big thing that pops up with people struggling with invisible disabilities, especially more so for those people who are hiding their disability, is the feeling of isolation. The feeling of envy, looking at your able-bodied peers who are able to just be themselves.
Yeah.
Do all the normal things, not have this loaded thing on them. And this is something I struggled with when I was way younger, like middle school aged. This is something people like struggle with their whole lives. I have personally worked past that.
Yeah.
And I love my body and I'm impressed by what my body can do, but some people aren't. And that really hits hard with what we talked about in the last episode that we talked about disabilities. Most people with a disability will also have an accompanying mental disorder such as generalized anxiety or major depressive disorder. I have major depressive disorder, so I guess I'm part of this club.
Is it in addition to your disability? Is it because of your disability, or is it just something that you also were born with, you know?
Well, for mine, it was probably more hereditary than environmental. For a lot of people in the disabled community, it's situational. It's always having it's thrown in your face over and over again, day in, day out, that you're just a little bit less than. And there's also the huge discrimination in the dating communities. Like, hey, if you have any kind of disability that's hereditary, or if it sounds like it could potentially be hereditary, people will avoid you like the goddamn plague. Which, right now, kind of ironic because we're living through a plague. And then, you know, a lot of the times, disabilities are just something that you will have for the rest of your life. And not being able to get the accommodations that you need because you're too embarrassed to, because people don't believe you, for all the many reasons you might be denied the help that you need. It really...
And this counts for both. This counts for both, like, physical and mental disabilities as well.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know, because I don't personally have a physical disability. I'm very able-bodied, but, like, I know, like, coming from somebody with, like, 2 different mental disabilities, it's like, especially because my family is such, like, they're Asian, which unfortunately they are very, like, they have high expectations, and they want their kids to be, like, the best. For me, it was like, I had issues asking for help from, like, college and schools and stuff like that, because I felt like I needed to be able to perform, like, I had to be, like, smarter than everyone else for some reason, you know? But yeah, but I don't know. I personally, I know that that's my experience, but I'm sure that, like, physical disabilities are just, like, they're probably even in many ways worse. Like,
well, see, it's difficult. Speaking from my own experience, there's only so far I can be on my feet and walking in a day, but that doesn't always register to the people around me. An early time when I was dating my husband, he wanted to go on a date, and he just kept me out too long.
Oh, man.
And it's not that I was an old lady and I wanted to go to bed. It was just, we were on our feet way longer than we should have, and I was embarrassed. He knew I was disabled. He had seen my leg brace that I used to sleep with at night to keep my muscles in order. Like, I was dropping subtle hints that we needed to stop and rest. But I was, you know, trying to put on my best self, a little bit tipsy. I wasn't being as proactive as I should have been in the situation. And so when I felt my legs breaking down...
Oh, shoot.
He hadn't seen my legs breaking down before. It was something he had not seen. So I was so embarrassed that I was getting anxious.
Oh, no.
And then my anxiety took off. And I eventually ended up having a panic attack, which set off my epilepsy. So I ended up in San Francisco having a seizure with my legs locking up with this guy that I really liked. And it was all...
Oh, that with this guy that I really... Literally, that's, like, the worst fear of, like, everyone's... With a guy that I like, no.
It was like everything was lining up to be the absolute worst. And what could have prevented it is if I was more vocal, like, hey... bitch, I need to sit down.
Wait, so this was in San Francisco? Oh my gosh. Eve's like, okay, first, able-bodied people already have issues walking around in San Francisco. What is wrong with you? Why did you do this to yourself? Oh
I liked him. That's why I did it to myself. I really like this guy.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's just...
I was like, where was she? Was she on a hike? I was like, oh my god, it's so much worse. So much worse. San Francisco's worse than hiking.
And so, like, my physical disabilities bled into my mental illness, which bled back into a different physical ailment, and it just ended up making my life so much worse. And so, we usually don't give advice this early on in the episode, but I'm going to give anybody who's listening who struggles with any kind of disability, mental or physical, I don't care if people can see it, voice yourself, because nobody is going to be there for you to stand up for you except for you. And yeah, it might be awkward. Yeah, people might be prejudiced against you or even just outright discriminatory, but that is their problem.
It is their problem.
You need to take yourself. Don't be like me. Don't have a seizure in the middle of San Francisco because you're too fucking embarrassed to sit down.
Oh my god.
Do better. Learn from my mistakes.
I just like registered the fact that you had a seizure in the middle of San Francisco.
Because I was having a panic attack. Yeah, it was all bad.
Oh my gosh. How did he handle it?
Like a champ.
I mean, yeah, I've seen your husband. I mean, I've seen, like, the first time I saw you seize, I was like, oh my God. Like, it was like, I'd never seen anybody seize in real life before. So I was just kind of like, oh, what do I do? I was like, Michael! Like, help me! I was like, help, your wife is seizing. I was like, what? I don't know what to do. And he was just like, it's fine. It's fine. Just she'll stop in a second. Just let her seize. And I was like, but
look at her body. Something's wrong with it. I am seeing the disability. It's a visible disability at the moment.
I was just like concerned. Actually, I have, like, as V likes to say, my type is like my type in women is disabled women for some reason. I hope that doesn't come off as, like, offensive. It's not. It's really, like, honestly, it's just I happen to have, like, my closest friends have somewhat invisible, like, you have an invisible. I think that Marjo definitely, actually, yeah. So Marjo was, like, for a long time, she was fine. Like, she seemed a lot more able-bodied because she had the resources to kind of manage it. And at this point, she didn't even know she had it. It was because she did a lot of hot yoga and, like, exercised a lot. So, like, her muscles were more healthy and, like, more intact. But then, like, because the pandemic happened, a lot of her resources to, like, cope with, like, just, well, not even cope at that point. It was just her way to stay fit and healthy because that's what she knew about herself. Like, all of that was taken away from her. And then like, all hell broke loose with her health and she didn't understand what it was. I've seen her, like, we'd be walking and her leg would, like, detach from the hip socket. And she would have to stand there, like, and I'd watch her just shove it right back into her hip. And at that point, I don't think she really even, like, I think she was just starting to learn the actual term for what it was, which is, like, EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I believe. I may be pronouncing that wrong. But, like, I just, like, because I know people with disabilities, I just can see you just never know what someone's going through, because she told me that she was at the grocery store and people, like, her hip would dislocate or something would dislocate where she couldn't, like, step. She couldn't walk, right? So she had to stand in one place and, like,
fix herself.
Yeah, fix herself. And people would be like, excuse me, can you get out of the way? Like, because she looks like she's able-bodied, right? Yeah. And then she'll turn around, she'll be like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to shove my hip, like, my leg back into my socket. Like, can you please walk around? Like, it's just, oh my God, it's crazy. And then another time, I watched her, very similar to my experience with you, seeing you seize for the first time. I don't know what it was that was going on. I don't know the terms for it, but, like, her like, whatever type of muscle tissue that was holding her head upright and, like, to her neck, to her neck bones, whatever muscles that were there, they weren't there anymore, or they weren't doing their job. And I watched her head, like, slide forward, and she started to panic. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, what do I do?
Terrifying.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? How do I help her? So I just, like, walked her over to the yoga mat, because we both do yoga, and I just kind of laid her down. And I was just, like, in my head, I was like, well, do I call an ambulance? Like, what do I do? So she got over it for, like, after a little bit. But it was, like, as somebody who's able-bodied and doesn't know, or even if I was disabled and didn't have what she had, like, it's just it's scary.
Yeah, then it's like, how would you know?
Like, how would I know? Like, what do we do? And the scary part is she didn't know what she found out literally a week later that she had all of these allergies to different, like, things, including medications that she didn't know about. So perhaps if I called the ambulance, they could have, like, injected her with something that could have killed her, because she didn't know about, like, the allergies that she had. So now, like, watching her discover this disability, like, more and more about it, was just, like, mind-blowing, and it just made me feel like so grateful to be as able as I am. Like, it's just, so many people take so much for granted, like, and it's just, you don't understand what people have to go through. You really don't. Like, it, honestly, I was just yesterday, actually, I just talked to her, this week, actually maybe it was today, I don't know, whatever. I just talked to her, and like all she can eat right now is eggs.
Oh.
Eggs and fish. And I was just like, oh my God. It's because she has so many, like, I don't know if like allergies would be considered a disability.
Not technically. That would just be a dietary restriction.
Right. But like this woman has a lot of them on top of her like disability. So like, and her allergies exacerbate her disability symptoms, because whatever it is, it's like whatever it is that like the EDS does to her like muscles, when she eats certain foods, when she eats like certain different things, it can irritate that even more and make it worse.
Can only imagine how frustrating that is. And, you know, if she eventually needs a placard to park in the disabled parking spaces just so it's a little safer for her to go grocery shopping, she'll probably get harassed.
We'll have to try to get her on the show if she wants to. But, like, she, I don't know, she may get harassed. But at the same time, it's just, I think that she's like you. She's very vigilant about what needs to be done. Like she knows her limits, and she knows like what has to be done. And I have no doubts that once she's vaccinated and like the world kind of moves back into normalcy, she'll be able to like manage it in a way that will be a little bit like give her more ability to live a more functional and like pain-free lifestyle. Just because like before all of that, she was much more able-bodied looking and functioning and all that stuff. Like, I think that's the thing about her disability. It's just like, it's very dependent on whether you manage it right or not. Like some people's disabilities you can't manage that way, but like for hers, it's very, very like dependent on whether you take care of yourself or not.
I was watching an episode of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy.
Oh, I love that show.
And there was an episode specifically about a man who got shot and lost the ability to use his legs. And so his house was made for an able-bodied person. Right. And so, you know, I don't remember the name of the guy that does the home renovations, but he basically had to renovate everything in the house to make it functional for him, because we live in a world that's catered to able-bodied people. And it makes sense, you want to cater to the most people possible. But when there's like no option for this guy to get into his house unless he crawls out of his wheelchair
up the
stairs, dragging his wheelchair behind him, it's like, yeah.
Okay, all I have to say is that a lot of these like physically disabled people, they grind like 10 times as hard as a lot of able-bodied people to do the same things that we do. Like it's nuts. It's crazy. It's crazy to me. Like
the things that you as an able-bodied person might not understand or could potentially be issues can make the difference between a person living independently and a person needing to get assistance. And so I just think us as in this society, we have taken steps. Like a couple of things that have happened that have made the world better for people with disabilities is, you know, changing terminology is a big one. Because I hate saying the word, but the word retard used to get thrown around like candy. And now it's like, it's not okay to say because it's such a degrading term. And it boils down to anybody struggling.
At what point was it not? Like, at what point was it not offensive? I feel like there was a point in history where it was a medical term, right? It
was a medical term for anybody who wasn't 100% perfect, which is not helpful.
That's not helpful at all.
Yeah, no.
That's really not helpful at all.
And so then eventually it got used as a slur, as something to like make fun of somebody. Like I would be considered retarded because I am severely dyslexic and I sometimes can't spell my own name. But I am as smart as like half the people that I know because I can retain information.
You're smart. You are smarter than most people. I'm sorry, but like I don't know if we live in the same universe, but I'm gonna tell you right now, you're a lot smarter than a lot of people. Like
I retain information very easily. I can regurgitate information given to me very easily. So I am definitely not stupid, and so I shouldn't be called retarded. And my struggles with reading is very different than somebody who is on the autism spectrum who has problem with textures, but can like do schooling like a normal person and just has a problem with textures and sounds.
Sounds, yeah.
Yeah, and that's very different than a person who has extreme anxiety. And that's very different than a person who is completely able and just can't use their legs.
So anxiety is a disability, right? To an extent, right?
See, this is a whole very interesting debate. At what point does a mental illness become a mental disability? And that's why it's all like, it's hard to say where that line is, because there's a lot of debate and there's not a concrete answer right now. And so because there's not a concrete answer, I can't say for at what point. But when you are so depressed or anxious that you can't leave your house, you might as well be somebody disabled because you're not living an able life. Or that's my opinion, at least.
The nature of my, like, I feel like I call it my main, like, disorder because it's the one that's, like, kind of run my life the most. It's bipolar disorder. And, like, because of the symptoms of bipolar disorder, it's, like, taken me on so many roller coasters of different, like, sub disorders that it's, like, it's kind of, like, insane because there are people who only know me as, like, the manic, like, very, very aggressive and fast-thinking quip person. And then there are also people who, like, know me as a very shy, or, like, I had a lot of social anxiety that prevented me from, like, even being able to speak in the presence of other people or, like, leave the house or go, like, because it was because of, like, the embarrassment of what I had done when I was manic. Like, so I've experienced, I feel like from my experience, I want to say that, like, when I had social anxiety, it was a disability because it prevented me from being able to communicate with people and, like, leave the house and, like, enjoy life like a normal person.
See, and that's where some of the people's argument is. It's like, hey, just like a person who can't move any of their limbs and has to wait till somebody helps them into a chair can't interact with society, my mental condition keeps me from interacting with society. And that's where that debate really comes in. And there's, like, always a line where it goes from being a debate into just being a spectrum. Getting back to the whole point, like, things improve, not just when we label them, but when we understand that the person's struggle is their struggle. And yeah, there is, like, a term for it, and knowing the term means knowing a way to help work around it. Work around for me just means, like, give me a longer time to read that sentence than you would give anybody else time to read said sentence.
It's funny. It's so funny because I didn't learn this. Okay, so I basically, when we first started becoming, like, closer friends, I learned all these things about you. And, like, I didn't know any of these things about you, but I learned basically just, like, through being in proximity with you and, like, interacting with you. Apparently I text, like, 5 times as fast as you do.
Oh my God, yes.
I think I text faster than the average person. So, like, on top of that, like, so it's just, like, her answers would come, like, 10 texts after, like,
it's like, I know you asked me a question and now you're on to a completely different topic, but girl, hold on. I can't even read as fast as you can text.
So you're an able-bodied person and you're just getting to know someone who may have a disability that they may not understand fully or just starting to learn about. Like, how do they interact with you in a way that is, like, helpful and, like, but not invasive, you know? Like,
well, it depends on what their situation is. If it's a mental thing, it's better to ask. If it's a physical thing, just keep an eye on them. Like, for me, if we're talking about my cerebral palsy, if I'm out with somebody in a crowd and they see that I am, like, all of a sudden slowing down, maybe offer up a break. It doesn't have to be like, hey, how disabled are you? How many steps can you take? It can just be like, hey, do you need a break?
How many steps can you... How long can we hang out today? Like...
Whenever you're asking to, like, be helpful, don't, like, point out the fact that they're disabled. Just be like, hey, do you need some help? Don't be like, hey, disabled person, how can I assist you?
Who actually says that?
Be open to accommodating them. and don't point out that they're disabled. They know they're disabled. You pointing out that they're disabled is not going to be helpful. And Kat is honestly, as a friend, is great at this. We'll be out and she's like, hey, do you want to stop and eat? Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do need to get off my feet and eat.
But I learned this though. I it wasn't something that I knew. It was like, I think that the first time I saw this and realized was when we were out at, like, where were we? The Sac, the Old Town Sac, and your feet started, like, you started to seize up, like you had mentioned with, like, with your husband in the city, and I'd never seen that before, and I was just like, but I guess maybe you had, like, a similar, like, you didn't want to say anything about it, and then you started to feel it, and then I saw it, and I was like, oh my God, are you okay? Like, it was just like, I was like, okay, well, like, let's just go not walk around. Like, let's go sit down so that your legs can, like, function again. Like, oh my gosh.
But see, then it's totally different for people with mental disabilities, because you can't physically look for the signs of, hey, this person's struggling. And so if a person's trying to read and they're dyslexic, being like, hey, are you able to read that? That's insulting.
Okay, I've never... Okay, first of all, I don't have dyslexia, so of course I probably don't encounter these situations, but I just cannot imagine being that rude.
Yeah, no, see, like, it's totally different from a physical versus mental. With a mental disability, it's more polite to just ask, because you can't see what's inside of somebody's head. With a physical disability, there's usually small signs that you can pick up from. And so, for me, at least, and it might be different person to person, but as an able-bodied person, if you're wanting to help a friend who's disabled, if it's a physical thing, offer to help, offer to take a break, offer to help. If it's a mental thing, ask them what they struggle with, and just let them tell you what would be helpful.
Oh my God, there's so many ways you could be insulting. There's so many ways.
I've had people say, like, really fucked up things to me, and I think that they were meaning to be helpful.
About your mental disability?
About my physical one, more than my mental one, because dyslexia doesn't come up too often outside of a school setting.
Right. That makes sense.
And, you know, I've found amazing coping mechanism for my dyslexia. Every now and then I will say something embarrassing in a text, but I can always blame it on autocorrect.
That's so fun. But you recently discovered that you could voice text too, which is great.
Text works like 90% of the time. It doesn't help me with reading the text that was sent to me, so I still take a while.
I think that there's probably an option, like, if you wanted it, for it to, like, read to you.
Yeah, but that's embarrassing. That's super embarrassing to have your phone read messages out loud, especially...
Sorry.
Especially if it's something sensitive, like if my friend's telling me... Yeah, it's like...
Oh, you're right. Yeah,
that can be
a bit.
Yeah. And then on top of that, sometimes, like, text messages come off harsher than they mean to be, and I'm like, shit, I sound like such a fucking asshole. And it's like, it's hard. Just try to be understanding.
Well, like, with texting, it's like, even for the average person, like, texting can be hard to interpret and to like, first of all, to interpret and to be on the other end of, like, sending the message too, because, like, you have no idea, like, honestly, something could have happened in the other person's day that could, like, prime them to take something completely the wrong way. Like, you just don't know.
You never know. I guess that's the best advice. And then, you know, attitudes towards people with disabilities is improving, so I think it's hopeful in this arena that things will continue to improve.
I think that, you know what it is? I think this helps for a lot of different, like, social issues and, like, social situations and ideations and stuff like that. Social media has really given people with, like us using this podcast, but not just that, but even more immediate, like TikTok or, like, Instagram, people can be more vocal about what it's like to have something. Like, I've learned a lot about, like, what blindness, like, how blind people cope, and, like, what they prefer people do, and, like, to, like, because a lot of people tread or, like, tiptoe around, like, blind people not knowing, like, how to help them or what, like, you can, like, there are certain people that are so, like, proactive about educating the public that is like really helpful right now. Like on top of that, there's like people on the Asperger or autism spectrum talking about that. I mean, I talk about bipolar. I don't necessarily think that bipolar is, it's like you said, it's like depending on how severe the situation is. Because right now, I personally don't think that my bipolar is a disability. However, my ADHD, different story. Like, you know, it's just, and ADHD is also another very, very stigmatized disability, because I think a lot of people chalk it up to being lazy, unproductive. Yeah, disorganized is a symptom. It's not really can be an insult, but not really. Unproductive, lazy, just like straight up, or just rude sometimes. Like they also kind of have issues reading social cues, not as prominently as people on the autism spectrum, but like, it's just when I think that I'm a little more embarrassed to say that I have ADHD than I am to say that I have bipolar disorder, because of all the stigma attached to like being ADHD, and people also like overusing the term ADHD, which is an issue too. Because like a lot of people just say like, oh, I'm so ADHD, when it's just really they're being lazy, or like they're just like a little bit like hyper today or something like that. But there are people with ADHD that really struggle. Like it's a real struggle. So I don't know. And I don't know. I know that this is your topic, because it's just like, for me, the disabilities aren't as like prominent, but they still exist, you know? Like, and I think that while there are like disabilities that are more severe than other disabilities, I think that everyone should be a little mindful. Like everyone, honestly, like almost everyone has a problem, you know? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's actually good advice to leave off as. It's just, as a person, able-bodied or not able-bodied, just try to be mindful of other people, because you never know. Be
respectful.
You can't
like,
tell.
Honestly, it's like, just, if anything, just like be respectful. That's like bottom line. Like, that's all you have to do. It's like, be respectful, and like everything can move on from there. I think that everything falls apart once you like forget the respect. So
yeah. So at that, we'll say goodbye to you guys for today. Check us out on our other show, The Cat and V Show, where we talk about pop culture and other fun, wonderful things. And we will see you in next week's episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Scooter podcast is a conversation between,
you guessed it,
Sarah
and Scooter. We are not experts on any of these topics.
Just hoping to spark something like an idea, conversation, or even a revelation.
Subjects will vary depending on our friends, family, and community.
Sometimes it will be what we want to talk about.
New episodes drop every week on all of your favorite podcast formats.
So pull up a chair and let's talk about stuff.